from the department.
Sorry.
No, it's not your fault. I didn't know Zoom was going to say that. Sorry. So our first speaker is Christina Rodriguez in psychology, who will speak on the effects of perceived discrimination on cognitive performance mediated through self-efficacy. Please welcome Christina.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Christina Rodriguez. I am a second-year psychology major, and I am working under the instruction of Dr. Erin Seitz. And I will be presenting on the effects of discrimination on cognitive performance mediated through self-efficacy. Sorry. So here's an overview of the poster that I'll be going into depth on each section. And here is the general model that I'll be basing my project off of. Okay, so for a little bit of introduction, background, and goals. So I started off for the inspiration of this project trying to look at different implications of discrimination. And so I did find in my research that there's a decrease in mental health. And so there's increased anxiety, increased depression, and even in the African-American community, an increase of paranoia. I did find also in my research that there's little investigation on the cognitive effects, and it's more so focused on mental health. And so I'll be looking more so specifically at executive function, which are the cognitive processes that are needed for control of behavior. Some more background on this study is that I found that the influence of discrimination does have a more detrimental effect on mental health and well-being. More specifically, the few research articles that I found that looked at cognitive implications found that blatant discrimination more so affected ethnic majority groups. So for example, white people in the United States were more affected by blatant racism, whereas ambiguous discrimination had greater cognitive implications on ethnic minority groups. And I also found that discrimination also has academic implications for students, and more specifically for Latinx adolescents. They had lower academic performance when they felt that they were experiencing discrimination in their school environment. And so for my goals of this overall study is looking at the influence of discrimination on specifically executive function. And I'm also looking for mediating effects of self-efficacy. I chose to focus also on self-efficacy because I think that discrimination does have a negative effect on how one views their capabilities of achieving a certain goal. Sorry. Okay, and so for my overall project, I'm going to be focusing on 3 different hypotheses. And so my overall primary one is looking at the higher level of perceived discrimination and how this affects cognitive performance on subjects. My secondary hypothesis looks at how the level of self-efficacy mediates the relationship between discrimination and cognitive performance. And my third hypothesis examines whether cognitive training can raise the level of self-efficacy within subjects. And so for the beginning of my method section, we are looking at undergraduate students, both from UC Riverside and UC Irvine. And I'm attaching my study to an existing multi-institutional study funded by the National Institute of Mental Health. And so this is my overall procedure, and this is the model that I'll be going over, and I'll return to this slide at the end. But just for a brief overview, the study consists of 3 days of pre-test, 16 days of training, and 3 days of post-test. And so the participants are split into different conditions. And so the recollect condition will be working memory training tasks, and the KB or knowledge builders acts as an active control condition where they just answer knowledge-based questions. And I'll go more into the scales at the end. Okay. And so for the pre-test and post-test, the subjects will be performing different assessments, and they focus on different cognitive focuses, I guess. And such as working memory or inhibition. And so for the sake of time, I can go over these during questions, but this isn't the main focus of my project, so continue. And so during the training, which is the 16-day period that you saw in my model, the participants within this condition will be doing one of three of these or all three of these tasks. And so the NBAC is a certain N value that you receive. So it could be 1, as in this example. And so there will be a streamline of different images. You won't see all of these at once. You'll see these one at a time. And so if you're given the N value of 1, then you have to remember 1 back. So for example, if you were presented with this star and then this next one is the star, you would tap this one as the hand suggests. Similarly with the 2 back, if your N value is 2, then you would do 1, 2 or 1, 2 back, and you would tap onto this icon. Similarly with this one and 3 back and so on. And so this does work working memory. Similarly for the simple span, you will be presented a little flower from this projector, and it will show one at a time. And then you'll transition to a screen that has these. So for example, if this was the first one, then you want to tap it in the order that it was presented to you. So for example, it could be the purple one first, then the brown, then the yellow, and the black. And so this also works working memory. Going into complex span, it looks at the same task. So you do this initially, where the only difference is that in between each projection of a flower, you will be shown these germ-like figures. And so my apologies for not being able to include a video, but for these ones, they'll be moving at a faster rate versus these ones will be moving at a slower rate. So if it's moving faster, then you want to swipe in the opposite direction. And if it's moving slower, then you'd want to swipe in the opposite direction, or sorry, same direction. So, and this is meant to try and distract you from your working memory processing. And so these are what the working memory condition subjects will be doing in the 16 days. And this will be 40 minutes of their day. In the knowledge builders condition, like I said, it's just random questions that you're answering for knowledge building. So for example, in the vocabulary category, they'll ask you, what does creed mean? And then it'll give you these answers, or in world geography, what flag or what country does this flag represent? So this is just what they do for the 40 minutes for the 16 days. Sorry. Okay. And so this is the main focus of my overall study, and I'm looking at these 2 questionnaires. So the first one is the general self-efficacy scale, and as you saw, it was labeled the GSE scale. It is 10 items or statements and scored on a 1 to 4 point scale, meaning that the higher your score is, the more points that you have, the more self-efficacy you possess. And so one example of a statement that you might see on here is that it is easy for me to stick to my aims and accomplish my goals. And you will answer as not at all like me, somewhat like me, very like me, or exactly like me. The next one will be the perceived discrimination scale, or as labeled the PD scale. And this is looking at the subject's lifetime and daily and generalized perceived discrimination. And so it is 27 items because it's looking at a greater variety of discriminations. And it is reverse scored on a 5 point scale, meaning the lower you score, the greater discrimination you perceive you experience. And so one example of a statement that you'll see is that you, quote, sorry, you are treated with less respect than other people. And then you would answer, like, this is like off every day and on a range from every day or all the time or to not at all. And so I'll be looking at the scores of both of these for the participants. So going back to my overall model, in the 3 days of the pretest, since I want to look at the growth or the difference between the 2 self-efficacy scores, this is why it's administered both at the beginning and the end, because we also want to look at how the training influences this score. And then we also wanted to administer the perceived discrimination scale at the end, so as to not distract or guide the attention or suspicions of the participants that this is a discrimination-based study. Okay. So the next steps that I'm looking at in my study is my proposed data analysis. So for addressing the correlation between experience discrimination and cognitive performance, I'll be performing correlational analysis. For the second hypothesis, looking at the mediating effects, I'll be looking at regression, or people performing a regression. And then for the third hypothesis of raising the self-efficacy levels, I'll be looking at I'll be performing a t-test, and my expected results is that there will be a negative correlation. Self-efficacy levels will have a mediating effect, and working memory training will raise self-efficacy levels. And so right now we're collecting data, and I'll be looking to analyze that next. But yes, thank you.